Alrighty then. How's it going? Hope everything's going great in your world. This is Dr. Michael Young. We are wrapping up our course. This is the last of our recorded lessons. Excuse me. I have spent a lot of today actually looking at many of your group video recording projects. I hope to have those grades up there very soon. Meantime, let's push ahead. This last topic that we're talking about, managing change and stress. We're focusing on, we've already done a section. One of our chapters talked about stress at the individual level. This is really talking about change and stress at the organizational level. Although they're somewhat related, the primary topic of this is organizational change. And organizational change is actually a topic that gets a lot of press, something that gets studied a lot because it's something that's important. We know that organizational change is a key component, and it's a very important topic in organizational success. And so, I've been involved in several studies as well as several courses, and I've spoken with people that are change experts. And so the forces for change for an organization can come from outside the organization, and they can also come from inside the organization. Actually, there's not a clear distinction, and you can think about this, you'll see what I mean. There's not a clear distinction between what's outside and inside of an organization. Organization is made up of stakeholders, and so the boundaries of what's internal and what's external, not always exactly totally clear. But let's roll with it for just a moment and say that we're talking about the external factors first. External factors can consist of things like demographic characteristics. Now you can see this is not entirely external because if the population is changing, that means that the stakeholders are changing, and so that it means that the external and internal characteristics sort of blend here, forces. What's happening right now demographically? Well, what's not happening right now demographically? We have a big change in immigration. We have an aging workforce. We have lots of things happening. These demographic characteristics are causing organizations to be forced to change. This is not just their employees, but also their markets. We'll see in just a moment. Technological advancements, communications technology allows us to teach these courses remotely, which is we're still trying to work out some of the bugs of this. Then we also have shareholder, customer, and market changes. There are changes in what people expect. You guys have way different needs, and you have way different purchasing patterns and behaviors than do I, because we're part of a different generation. Not only did we grow up in different times, very different times, but also we're at different stages of life. And so the demographic changes change the markets. There's also social and political pressures. We have, it looks like we are going through a process of deglobalization right now on the international scene. We have the Russian invasion of Ukraine. All of these are causing social and political pressures. We have this pandemic, the COVID pandemic, and it seems like it's going on and on and on. This is creating further social and political pressures, which means that organizations have to change. And our dear university, West Virginia State University, is not immune to any of these changes. Our university is going through a lot of changes right now in the way that we deliver courses and our student body and so forth and so on. We also have, again, sticking with that internal-external dichotomy, we also have these internal forces. Now, the external forces influence the human resource issues, for example, and the managerial behaviors and decisions. These are the internal forces, and these cause possibly subtle internal forces like low levels of job satisfaction, which means that the organization needs to respond. This might show up in low productivity, increased conflict, or strikes. I don't know if you guys noticed this, but, the gross domestic product actually shrank in the first quarter of 2022, which is something that economists were not expecting. That just about there has to be some productivity in there somewhere. Problems with productivity, because we've got inflation, we've got unemployment at very low levels. So that means that it must be, part of the reason must be because of low productivity. And so that means that organizations are probably going to have to change. Here we have 3 general models of change. Let me move this up here out of the way. First, let's look about all of these 3 models use the same assumptions, that there's going to be some resistance. And when it comes to resistance, organizations have to unlearn to overcome that resistance. Then they have to relearn to make those changes take place. Second assumption is motivation. I think this should be reinforcement. And then people make or break the change. And then down here we've got 3 different models of organizational change. And we're going from low to high levels of degrees of complexity, cost and uncertainty, and potential for resistance to change. One of the models of change that we're going to look at is by a guy named Lewin. Lewin described changing as a process of unfreezing, changing, and refreezing. Let's think about that for a moment. We know that organizations are going to be facing inertia. People don't like to change. Organizations don't like to change. People don't want to be pushed out of their comfort zones. People want to stay in their comfort zones. But staying in comfort zones is not a possibility. It's not a possibility for you. It's not a possibility for me. It's not in the realm of options for West Virginia State University. We constantly have to change and push ourselves out of our comfort zones at all levels. So how do we do that? We need to, according to Lewin, create the motivation for change. This is something that people all agree on. Sometimes they say create a sense of urgency. So we need to unfreeze our ways of thinking, patterns of behavior. Then we change, and then we need to refreeze so that we can capture those benefits of those changes that we have. Otherwise, we go back, right? We'll regress to where we were before. Hope that makes sense. Next one we're going to look at is Kotter's model. Kotter came up with this 8 different steps, sequential, have to be in this particular order. Yeah, a lot of people that study organizational change believe that organizations will not change without a sense of urgency. This can be a real sense of urgency. For example, let's talk about West Virginia State University. We are experiencing drop of enrollments. That's a real sense of urgency. We're not alone in that. All right, we're facing enrollment problems. Lots of universities all across the United States right now are facing enrollment problems. There are lots of reasons for that. But that's creating a sense of urgency. We know that if we don't change, it's going to be a big problem. So the first one is establish this sense of urgency. The sense of urgency could also be reinforced by a leader that realizes and senses that something is going to come up. Even if we weren't facing this, a crisis, a real leader might say, listen, we need to change. We need to push forward or, we're going to get into problems. So the sense of urgency might be real. It might be a reaction that if we don't change right away, we're going to go out of business. Or it might be more created by top managers or pointed out by top managers, saying that if we don't change, sooner or later we're going to face a problem. We got to keep on our toes. And so that's the establish a sense of urgency. Something that's just about all change models in organizational change emphasize this, not just Kotter, but you got to have some reason for changing. Then you got to get people to buy in. You got to get some people that are going to be, sometimes we say, championing this change, around a vision and strategy, right? You've got to let people know. We sometimes call this creating legitimacy for the change. And we need to empower broad-based action. We've got to give people permission to fail while this change is taking place. We want to have short-term wins during the change process. We want to consolidate the gains that we have so that we can produce more change, and we hope to anchor those new approaches in the new culture or the existing culture. This one is partly, it's kind of a mid-level approach. It's not reactive and it's not proactive, totally reactive or totally proactive. It's change through organizational development. And here we have a diagram in which we have a diagnosis. What's the problem? What's causing the problem? And then we have the intervention. What can be done to solve the problem? And then evaluation. Is the intervention working? And then we have what we call feedback loops in the language of diagrams. Is it working? What does the evaluation suggest about the diagnosis and the effectiveness of the intervention? Do we need to go back and look at phase 2 again? One thing's for certain is that there's going to be resistance to change. This is, in this particular lesson, we're focusing on the organization. But the organization is made up of individuals. Individuals are resistant to change. And students are resistant to change. Believe me, I know. I've dealt with students for years and years and years. I know that students don't want to change. Students don't want to be pushed out of their comfort zone. Can't blame them for that. That's a common human trait. Some students, some individuals are more comfortable pushing outside of their boundaries, their previous comfort zone, than are others. So anyway, so next thing we have is this model. Pull this out of the way here. I'll put it right here, right there in the middle of everything. Okay, in this diagram, this is a diagram depicting the dynamic model of resistance to change. You've got, let's start over here, the change agent characteristics. The person or whatever, or group of people that's pushing the change agent. Then you've got the recipient. This is the people or the organization, the other members of the organization in which you might say this is being inflicted, this change. And then down here you have this change agent recipient relationship. And so you have all three of these kind of interacting together and creating this resistance to change. Now, what does that mean? Well, we've got another description of what each of those is. Some examples of, let's start over here, like we did with the diagram. Some characteristics of the change agent that might cause this resistance to change. Decisions that disrupt cultural traditions or group relationships, personality conflicts, lack of tact or poor timing, leadership style may not be conducive to getting people to buy into the change, and then failing to legitimize the change. Legitimization is a term that we've used before. It's a term from sociology that means that if something is accepted at the societal level or at the organizational level, it's said to be legitimate. And if it doesn't, then it's illegitimate. Yeah, and illegitimate means that it's not accepted. People don't accept it as being part of the norms of culture, the organization, or the society. Part of the recipient characteristics that may be conducive to creating resistance to change. A disposition. Disposition just means a characteristic, right? Dispositional resistance to change. It always exists. There's always a dispositional resistance to change. It just depends on how high or how low it is. People don't like surprise and they fear the unknown. There's a huge fear of failure. There's a loss of job status or security. There's peer pressure. There's past success. You know, there's an expression For example, I've heard people say Kodak. Kodak did not change. They did not take advantage, or they did not adapt to the digital revolution. They were tied to the old types of cameras. And so I've heard people say before that they were a victim of their own success. Past success can be something that causes an organization to be resistant to change. Oh, last one. The change agent-recipient relationship. This resistance to change is reduced when there's a positive, trusting relationship. Next, I'm going to be talking about stress. We talked about stress in our chapter on positive organizational behavior. So this is some stuff ground that we've already covered, but stress, adaptive response to environmental demands referred to as stressors. They produce adaptive responses. These responses are physical, emotional, behavioral reactions to the stresses. Stress is inevitable. You can't avoid stress. The only way you can completely avoid stress is to die, right? Death is the complete eliminator of any stresses whatsoever. As long as we're alive, as long as we're needing to react to the environment that's out there, as long as we exist, the philosophers call this existential angst. As long as we exist, we're going to experience existential angst. And right, so stress can be good. You're going to have stress. You better learn how to deal with it. Whenever you feel those butterflies in your stomach, that's a good thing. It means you're still alive, right? Whenever you feel that yourself, getting mad or getting angry or getting stressed or nervous about something, channel that, move it into the right direction. Good stress is called eustress. Remember, stress is not just nervous tension. Stress can have positive consequences. We got to have some stress. Stress is not something that we can avoid unless we die. You got primary success, and then you got secondary stress. Stress is a perception of whether a stressor is irrelevant, positive, or negative. Let's suppose that you're trying to get your group video recording project completed, and you finally got all of the research done. Everybody's got their parts. You've managed to connect everybody together, and then you start making the recording, and then for some reason the equipment fails. Right? Hey, can you relate to that? I sure can. That's going to cause you stress. So that's going to happen. Let's suppose that happens. That's going to cause you stress. All right? That's the primary event. Equipment failure causes stress. The secondary appraisal is, oh crap, now I'm getting stressed out. And so you get stressed out about being stressed out. So that's the secondary appraisal. So you might have heard this before, and we kind of already know this. It's not what happens to you that causes the stress, but the response that matters. It's how you respond to that. The old pain in life is inevitable, but suffering, that's optional. Or at least you can control how much you suffer, right? But again, this is at the personal level, which we've already covered in an earlier point. So here we are, in this chapter, we're talking mostly about organizational resistance to change. So let's see what we have here. Employees are more likely to resist when they perceive that the personal costs of change outweigh the benefits. Yeah, that makes sense, right? Each of us does a cost-benefit analysis in our head. And Somebody's pushing us to change. Well, why should I change? What's in it for me? I might identify with the organization and its goals, but at some level, we're all looking out for ourselves. And so, how do we do that? When you're trying to change, you need to provide as much information as possible to the employees. Inform employees about the reasons or rationale. This is the reason that human resource management is a very interesting topic. It's also a very important topic. You need to communicate. You need to let employees know. You need to make them feel like they're part of the organization. Otherwise, you're going to find resistance. Related to that, you need to have meetings to address the employees' questions, provide employees the opportunity to discuss how to respond to the change. Build trust. Remember, we talked about this, the agent and recipient trust relationship. You need to have that. Overcoming resistance to change. Avoid the assumption that people are consciously resisting change. Most of the resistance to change comes at the subconscious level. Obtain employee feedback about the obstacles to change. Consider modifying the target elements of change. So, pushing this a little bit further, overcoming resistance to change. How can managers respond? You need to inspire, recognize progress, expect mistakes, model, measure, and reward collaboration. Remain positive. Keep your eye on the goals and time. Hey guys, that's it. We're wrapped up. This is Dr. Michael Young. Last time I'm going to say this, guys, but stay awesome. Talk to you later.